Well, at the beginning, there was nothing there. There was a small cottage in Chowder Bay. The grass was, waist high, and but it had been furnished remotely from Canberra. On my first day, I had a key to this locked site, and I drove down and found the only way in was through the window. And I had to dismantle some of these enormous desks so that I could open the internal doors against them. So things were pretty basic, and there were parcels waiting for me from enthusiastic members of the community who had plans for the sites.
The sites themselves were, sort of fairly ramshackle because Defence knew they were going to be leaving, so they didn't maintain them as much as they would have otherwise. The weeds had started to become more prevalent. Buildings were run down. There was, there was lots of damage to things. So it was in a pretty poor condition. And yet it had this romantic beauty that nowadays we romanticize ruins, because they're not, it sort of has a slight, I suppose science fiction or fantasy movie kind of element to it. And yet it had this romantic ruin beauty to it as well, in that condition.
In the early days, we sought really to give the public as much information with our ideas, and we set up quite a few community meetings, but also exhibitions showing our ideas before we formulated our plans. And through those, I think that's where the public could see, we weren't just going to do any ordinary conservation on these sites. We had a vision that was far better than what had been done before in Sydney.
I guess for us, the priority was to get a better understanding of the sites. They'd been defence sites, they'd been closed to the public forever, effectively, and the task was to weave these sites back into the life of the community, back into the life of the city. And in the end, because we had such a large group who increasingly became committed to this holistic approach, it sorted itself out. I think people began to realise that this was something for everyone, and we needed to keep that top of mind in all of our plans.
I was determined that these would not become the preserve of the elite of Mossman, or the elite of Manly, or the elite of Woolwich. That these should be open to as many people in Sydney and New South Wales, and indeed Australia. And the way we did that is we had, for instance, a building down on the foreshore which we used for receptions. So we got weddings from all over Sydney.
These lands are so iconic and so important to the people of Australia that it is important that they do remain open to the public. And that's one of the important things that the Headland Preservation Group has always fought for.
One of our first projects, which I think was a significant project, though minor, but one over the public, was taking down all the barbed wire fences and signs that basically said that you'd be shot if you passed through the gate. So just breaking down those physical barriers, we just, within the first 6 months, and just saying to the public, you can come in. Even though we haven't restored anything, these sites are open.
We went through this process of, I guess, concocting, excuses for people to come and visit the sites. For example, we would have a seafood festival at Woolwich Dock, or we'd have music and arts festivals on Cockatoo Island, and people just loved the fact that they could get access to these sites. They'd heard so much about them. Some people had sneaked onto them, in the middle of the night, but no one had really got to freely come and enjoy them and see them for what they were.
Over time, the sites were opened up, the buildings were restored, the bushland was sensitively managed. The trust was limited initially to a 10-year limit, and then was going to be handed back to New South Wales to be kept and protected in public ownership. In 2007, the trust was running so well that the community didn't want it to hand back the lands to New South Wales, frankly, in 2011. And we lobbied hard for the trust to continue. And in the end, a bit of a compromise there, I guess, but they did extend it to 2033. 1983.